we coming?
We lost a good man today. The very best of us. For that Flynn wasn't just my hyena master. He was my friend. I loved him like a brother. And now, he's gone.
What is going on, y'all? How y'all doing today? We're going to let the room fill up. Thank you guys so much for joining us for episode, I think what this is, episode 18 of Making the Case. Making the Case, of course, is a live IG series that we host every Wednesday at 8 o'clock where we share stories from people who look like you, who are doing what you want to do. Because let's be honest, y'all, we want to see you guys winning. We want to see you guys manifesting. We want to see you guys breaking through and bagging these acceptances, getting them scores up, and living that lawyer dream. Y'all know what I'm talking about? And so, of course, as usual, my name is Anthony. I'm holding it down here in Missouri, Midwest. Happy holidays to everybody out there. As our room continues to fill up, I want you guys to let us know where it is that you're viewing our session from. All right, because again, I know that oftentimes during the holidays, it could be a tough time. I know my law students, you guys are waiting for finals. I know a lot of people are trying to make the decision, do I take my LSAT again? Or do I keep my score? Or how do I go about studying? Happy holidays, bro. And so again, as our room fills up, and I love it, you guys, we want to let you guys, we got DMV in the house. What's going on, sis? And we got Jocelyn holding it down. What's going on, sis? What's going on, Mr. Presidential? Simply Kayla. What's going on, sis? What's going on, brother? What's going on, Darian? As our room fills up, I want you guys to make sure that you let us know where you're viewing our session from. We got Indianapolis in the house. We got Connecticut in the house. ATL, you got the DMV in the building. NYC holding it down, of course. We're going to have Doreen on in a second. We got Washington, the state. Okay. And so as our room fills up, again, our mission is to make sure that you guys have all the tools and skills you need to be successful. This session tonight we're going to be talking about is the LSAT. You guys, don't be shy. Do not be shy. We're blessed to have an opportunity to have an LSAT coach on. She is here for you guys to answer questions and also to give you guys an opportunity to actually touch, talk, and engage with someone who literally is goals. Sis went from a 148 to a 174, y'all. That's 6 points from a perfect score. And so for you guys who are struggling with the LSAT, this is a wonderful time for you guys to ask questions. Don't be scared. Of course, you guys know that this is a community, of a tribe, the Becoming JD tribe. We're here to help you guys along the way. So go ahead and get Doreen on. What's going on, TSM for SC? We'll see you, Lisa. And again, you guys, make sure come away full fed and with a clear picture regards to what you want to do. All right, so we got champagne season in the house. What's going on, fam? We got ATL in the building. What's going on, Miss Doreen? How we doing today, sis?
Hi, how are you? Thank you for having me.
Oh, I am blessed. I know I thought about you, Doreen, when so many people were just stressing about the LSAT. Like, you know what, man? I got to get the GOAT when it comes to that at all. Because we got to get her to be able to calm some nerves and also give some advice. Because I think one of the things that's beautiful about you, Doreen, is it's like people oftentimes see LSAT scores as this lofty thing that's unreachable. But what I love about you is your story about like, yo, I wasn't just perfect from the beginning, right? I had to. And so, of course, I don't want to talk too much. I do want to give you the floor so you can introduce yourself, and we go ahead and get this thing started, sis.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. So, hi, everyone. My name is Doreen. I created Before You Take the LSAT to help pre-law students, current lawyers, learn more about the possible career paths in law and not make all the mistakes I feel like I made along the way. And so I studied my way from a 148 on the LSAT to a 174, went to Columbia Law and first generation American professional. And I just feel like being able to share my path with other people hopefully can help people realize that you can do it. And just because you start your score somewhere doesn't mean you have to end close to that or just improve just a few points. I improved by 26 points, and I've been tutoring the LSAT now for almost 10 years, and I've seen a lot of people see a lot of jumps in their score. So if I can do it, if they can do it, you can do it. So yeah, I'm happy to answer. I don't know how you want to do this, Anthony. Do you want me to share some tips up front? Do you want me to answer questions? What would make the most sense?
I think probably great first is you maybe just sharing your story. I know you got a chance to share your story with our study group that one time
Yeah.
way in the fall, but now getting an opportunity to be able to just share your own genuine story, and then we just go from there. And you guys, man, I'm gonna call people out. You guys don't be shy. Listen, man, we have a wonderful opportunity here. You guys utilize this as an opportunity to get your questions answered. So please do not be shy. You got questions about RCs, you got questions about logic games, you got fears and anxiety, you having things that are tripping you up. This is what this is here for. We are all a community here, all winning and working together. Ain't gonna be no capping here. We're all here. It's a judgment-free zone. So feel free. Fill that chat box up with questions. And Nikita, I love you. I'm gonna call you out. You better ask some damn questions too. All right, so go ahead. Without further ado, I'll go ahead and give you the floor. Go ahead, sis.
Thank you. Okay, so the first thing I'll share is, as I mentioned, I'm the first in my family, so I had to figure out a lot of things on my own. And everything I share with you, I truly am hoping to help you guys also be able to achieve the same results. I'm doing this because I really do love helping people. So if you guys have any questions about things I share, feel free to ask me. But I had to figure out a lot of things on my own, so I spent a lot of time just doing research online, talking to people if I could find someone to talk to. And just trying out every different resource or strategy that I could find. A little bit about my LSAT path specifically. I took the test 4 times, and again, I'm sharing this because if you feel like you've taken it more than once, or if you're not confident, it's okay to take the test more than once. And in the beginning, I wouldn't share that with people because I felt a little ashamed to say that. But yeah, I took the test 4 times. My diagnostic I shared with all of you is a 148. My first score was a 161, and then I got a 164, I think, and then I canceled it. I can't remember the order of those two. So the third one, I guess, maybe I canceled, and then by the 4th try, I got a 174. A lot of people ask me how long I studied for. So at the time, I was working full-time. After the first time that I took it, I was working full-time. So I took it on and off, I wasn't studying full-time for it. So the actual studying itself was probably between 4 to 6 months. And that's something I also like to share because I think a lot of prep test companies, they like to give you, maybe 2 or 3 months of studying, or that's what they tend to recommend. I personally think if you can dedicate between 4 to 6 months, depending on if you're working full time or not, I think that's a little bit more realistic. Ideally, you want to give yourself some more flexibility in case you ever want to retake it. But there are other considerations, including, we can talk about this a little bit later, but including the fact that the logic games are going to be taken off the exam come August. So it's, you want to be strategic about how you think about this test, how you study for the test, what you focus on. So when I was studying, for example, one thing that I did was I focused on LR in the beginning because I just wanted to get really good at that, and I felt like it was foundational for the rest of the test. Another thing I like to share about my path is that when I was studying, so I mentioned that I was working full time, and at one point I like to just go all in whatever I'm doing. So it was very hard for me to be able to balance working full time with studying. I just wanted to study all day. And so at a certain point, I took 1 month off from working. And I know not everyone can do that, but I'm just sharing with you what I did and what worked for me. But I've had students who worked full time and were able to study and get the score they wanted, and they also went to Columbia. So it can be done. But yeah, so I took 1 month off from studying. I'm originally from LA. I was in LA at the time, and I decided to move to San Diego. And I had a friend that was living there going to UCSD, and she lived in a home where room and board were included. So that meant that I had the support of a friend she was not distracting me. She was letting me study. I didn't have to worry about my meals because board was included, right? I didn't have any family commitments coming from a Middle Eastern family. We have so many events, so many commitments, no boundaries. So it was very important for me to have my own space when I was studying and no distractions. So And then the only other thing that I committed to was working out. So I signed up for a Groupon for Pilates and I would run. Like those were my two things. Yeah, so those were my two things that I did. But literally all day I was just studying. And I always like to say, it's hard not sharing disclaimers because I know what works for me. And what worked for me is studying all day long for 1 month. But for some people, that doesn't work. Some people, so for example, my sister is actually studying for the LSAT right now, and her style is very different. She does not like to study all day long. That does not work well for her. It just is not her style. And so what she's doing right now is dedicating 5 hours of her day. So she's working part-time and half the day she works, half the day she's studying. And for her, that's more reasonable. I had classmates at Columbia who would only work, no, sorry, only study after work, and they were working full time. So from 6 to 9, they would study at work, and then sometimes they would even go out with their friends afterwards. So there's so many different ways that can work. I think the most important thing that I like to share is really to know what works for you and lean into that. I know that I'm an all-in 100% obsessive person, so that's what I did. 1 month, and in that 1 month, I improved my score from the 164 to 174. That was like my main chunk of studying that got me that improvement, and I think that's partially because I focus on games and had not focused on games in the past, and you can see a big improvement in games in a short period of time. So going back to the idea of like being strategic, I was being strategic with how I spent that month, but I also set myself up for success. No family distractions, no events. As someone who's social, coming from a Middle Eastern background, like I shared, first generation, like my parents just, it, for a long time, they were asking me, are you actually serious about going to law school? Like, are you just, they thought that I was not serious about it because it was taking me longer. But for me, I knew that I could do better and I didn't want to give up. And so another thing I like to share is, and I hope this is not, see, I get afraid when I just share everything because I hope it's not too much. And I do want to give people a chance to ask questions, but I'm sharing some of the stuff that I know has resonated with people in the past when I've spoken. So another thing I like to share is one thing that motivated me is I had a family friend who she did really well in the LSAT, and I knew her well. She was a really hard worker. Like, it didn't necessarily come natural to her, and I don't say that in a negative way because obviously it did come natural to me either. I started with a 148, which is not a bad score, but it's below the 50th percentile, so it wasn't going to get me to Columbia. So I knew that if I could see her doing it, I felt like I could do it also because it just meant that I had to put the effort in. It wasn't a thing where you just had to be born smart, right? And I think that's one thing that I like to share about the LSAT. It is really, truly a learnable test. If you think about it, it's a standardized test. There's only so many ways that they can create these questions. So if you put in the effort, and if you spend your time doing the right things, and we could talk about what that means later, but if you put in the effort and you spend your time on the right things, you can pick up the patterns, and that's what's going to get you to, that's what can help you get to the right, the score that you want to get to. One more thing I'll share, and then I'll let Anthony, if you have questions for me, or if you want me to keep going, either way. But one more thing that I like to share, and now I cut myself off and I forgot. Hold on 1 second. What was it? Oh, there was one other thing that really motivated me that I also like to share with people. And that was a study that came out of Berkeley when I was studying for the LSAT. And what it showed, UC Berkeley, and what it showed was that people who studied for the LSAT, like they did a brain scan of students that were taking an LSAT course, and they scanned their brains before they took the course and after they took the course. And what they saw was that people who improved their score, their brain literally changed.
Wow.
And yeah, and the reason why I like to share that is because for me, it was a little bit more difficult to, to get myself motivated for something that felt a little bit more abstract, right? Like, obviously, I cared to get into law school. I cared about getting scholarships, and the LSAT helps you with that, and those were also motivations. But when I knew that I could change my brain and literally become smarter, like there's a study showing me I can literally become smarter by studying for the LSAT, I think that changed the game for me. And so I like to share that. And if anybody wants the study, you can always DM me and I'll forward it to you. And that goes hand in hand with the idea of like, I was just really, really curious of how much I could improve my score. And I think so many people are focused on, I feel dumb, or why don't I get this, or this is taking too long, or, and I'll share this. You know, my sister tells me this and my students tell me this, so I want you guys to know, like, this is what I'm hearing, like, today and yesterday. People are like, this is so hard, my brain hurts. And I'm like, yes, that's right. That's what you want to be experienced. Your brain is not gonna feel, you know what I mean? Like, if you want your brain to change, it's gonna hurt. Like, if you go to the gym and your muscles are getting stronger, it's gonna hurt. Like, you get sore. That's the feeling you want to feel. And I want people to realize, like, yes, that's how you feel, and it can kind of suck. Like, depends how you look at it, right? I'm very optimistic, and I know not everyone thinks like that, but for me, I'm like, yes, I like this pain because I know that means that I'm getting better. Not everyone feels that way, and that's okay, right? I don't think my sister feels that way. She's just like, this sucks. I'm like, whatever, okay, that's fine. Um, but if you realize that that's getting you to your goal, and also that over time you're not going to feel that as much, right? Like, it's just going to get easier and easier. That's why, like, when you know, the gym is just the easiest way thing to compare to, the easiest analogy. But, like, you know, people increase their reps, or they increase the weight that they put on and things like that. And when you study, one of your goals is just to build your mental stamina. So, for example, you know, the test is 3 hours long. You should be studying at least for 3 hours long. When you're studying, at least like a few sessions should be at least 3 hours long, so that you're building your stamina for the day of the test. I personally would do, like, I would take tests that were much longer than the day of the test. So I think the test was like 4 hours at the time. I was probably taking tests that took me 5 hours. And what I mean by that is, like, I added an extra section so that the day of the test, yeah, so that the day of the test, like, it just felt a lot easier. And I would also take tests in coffee shops as if it was the real thing, so that if there were any, yeah, exactly. So there's all these distractions, but I'm just, like, so honed in that nothing can faze me, right? And I just feel like all of those things are so important. I feel like by the time I got to the day of the test, I could have taken the test again and gotten a similar score. And I feel like I just see so many people who score, like, people often tell me, like, you know, I score lower on the day of the test, and it's like, you have to put in the effort, that you're over prepared, so that the day of the test, you know, you should be scoring higher than what you want on your day of the test. That's what I'm saying.
And so,
So,
I mean, I hope you guys just realize these free gems you guys just got right here. 'Cause I think a lot of times also one of the things is, it's like, and you correct me if I'm wrong, oftentimes we kind of create like these false images, uh, you know, people with certain scores, and think that, you know, it's not achievable. And I want you guys, I speak to a lot of people, it's like, well, you know, I have to retake the test again. You guys, Alexandria, I see you on here right now. I'm going to call you out because I love you. But Patricia, listen, we sitting here talking to an attorney who took it 4 times. And it's okay. It's okay if you take it more than one time. The whole point of the matter is, you really, and one of the things is that the challenges that you guys are going through is because now we understand it. Doreen told us our brains are literally changing, right? So in that process, Patricia, we have to just be able to embrace that and accept that that's going to be a part of our growth process, okay? Because, and if we're able to do that, then, you know, this is going to have to be, I mean, I'm sure one of the reasons, you know what, this is going to suck. I'm not going to like it. But you know what, man? The results at the end of the day are going to be so much more worth it. And so one of the things I want to ask you, and we have people in the chat box with questions, but I wanted to start to fall off with this is, what do you tell your students how to deal with self-doubt? Because I honestly think sometimes self-doubt, Kenny, could be the bit more challenging than the test itself. And a lot of people are dealing with that right now because they're trying to figure out, I got January, I got February, or, oh my God, am I going to have to do it again next year? So what do you tell your students who are dealing with self-doubt? Because that kind of impacts studying too.
I think it's a really good question, because I feel like a lot of times the psychological aspects of the test are even more difficult, right? I feel like it's a mental game. I really do. I think that a big part of the LSAT is just a mental game. And I don't mean that in terms of intellectually mental. It's just, you have to be mentally strong and believe in yourself, or whatever it is. I think so. The self-doubt piece, I think it's kind of a weird recommendation, but I think one thing I would recommend is, and I don't want you guys to go read a book when you have to study, but if you have a lot of time between now and your test, or if you're going to be spending time on other things anyways, one thing I might recommend is there's a really good book by David Goggins called Can't Hurt Me. I recommend the audiobook over the book, but he basically just talks about everything he's overcome in his life. But not only that, like he shares tools that worked for him. And I'll just share one tool right now that maybe could be useful to some of the listeners. There's this concept called the cookie jar. Yeah, can't hurt me exactly. There's this concept called the cookie jar, and what he talks about is he when he is not needing the motivation or the belief in himself, right? Because when you need it, then it's harder to do it. But he just takes time aside to write down all of the things that he's accomplished and all of the things that he's been good at in the past, and he has it physically written out so that whenever he's doubting himself or whenever he needs to accomplish something or whenever he's a runner, so for him, when he's out running, he doesn't necessarily need to refer back to the physical list, but he's written it out so that whenever he needs to mentally refer back to it, he can. So I think it's hard. I think the self-doubt thing, right? Like, just find one person who you think is equally as smart as you or not as smart as you. It sounds so bad, but like, if you find one person who's done it that you feel like you can relate to, that's all you need. If they did it, you can do it. And you don't even need that, right? Like, I think, and it's just like, I think if you try to think less about yourself and more about like what's your purpose for doing what you're doing, who can you inspire by what you're doing, um, maybe having some curiosity about how well you can do, and also like there's just no point. Like if you, I don't know if that's helpful, but like there's just no point, right? If you put that energy into getting better, this is a learnable test. There's no point to feel self-doubt. Just put effort into learning, and the only thing you should feel bad about is a lack of effort. There's nothing else you should feel is holding you back. Like you just need to put in the work, and that doesn't mean that you're always going to see results. You have to be doing the right things in order to see results, but just put in the effort. And self-doubt is a difficult thing. I don't think it ever, I think we all, unfortunately, will always have that voice in our head that will tell us, not to get work done, not to believe in ourselves, whatever it is. It's just like, you just have to learn to be like, okay, I hear you, but I'm not listening to you. Like, you could just say whatever you're saying, but like, I'm here to win. I'm here to do what I need to do. And, sometimes if you need to, actually, you know what? Let me share one story, Anthony, actually, with you.
Man,
So, the listeners of my moment of self-doubt. Okay? So, I've had many, many, many moments of self-doubt, but what I think worked for me is when I told you guys I went to San Diego to study for the LSAT for 1 month. The first day I got there, um, I I was like, I don't know what I'm doing here. Like, I don't know why I decided to do this. It doesn't make any sense. How much can a person improve in 1 month? I've taken the test already 3 times. Like, what am I doing? And at that point, I've already moved to San Diego. I already took my month off. Like, it was not logical what I was thinking, but I just was like, I just didn't, I was like, I don't know how much better I can get in 1 month. This was such a terrible idea. And it was the last day to sign up for the LSAT, and I hadn't signed up yet. And I called my mom, and, I shared with you guys, there were times where my parents didn't believe in me and they're like, why are you even doing, like, why are you taking so long? You don't really want to go to law school. And I'm not saying that to bash them. I'm just sharing that parents are not always going to be supportive and they're not perfect, right? But I know at the end of the day, they have my back. And if it's not your parents, it could be someone else. But I called my mom and I told her how I was feeling and that I just was like, I don't think this makes sense. And she's like, you already took your time off. You already made the plans to be in San Diego. You already have this month. Just do it. And you could see how you do it. You could decide from there. Like, you don't really have much to lose. It's 1 month. And so that's what worked for me. In my moment of self-doubt, I called somebody who I thought could give me good advice. It doesn't have to be your mom or your dad or your sister. Those are people that I would probably go to, or a friend. But you just find people who have your back. And if you don't have someone, I think that's really something that you'll need in your life generally. So worth it to invest in that kind of friendship or relationship. But that's another thing. Journaling can also help. But yeah, That's a long answer to your question. I hope that's helpful for people though, but I think that's what I did. When I had moments of self-doubt, I usually like to call family. My sister's also like she really believes, my younger sister really believes in me, so sometimes when I have my moments, I call her and she reminds me of my cookie jar accomplishments. We don't call it that, but that concept of like thinking about your previous accomplishments can really help you with whatever you're currently facing and doubting, and you can keep going through
I mean,
it.
I love the answer. I think it was raw and real. K Prize did the hand clap. And I think a lot of times, like, like I said before, I think what's so awesome is it's like you really touched on a lot of people, because I get a lot of people, sis, in my DMs. They don't really have that support system. And so trying to figure out, is this a sign for me to quit? Should I give up? And, sometimes it's just being able to say, waiting for that perfect time is never, ever going to be here. All those feelings of discomfort is something that you're just going to have to be able to body and go through. And oftentimes, I'm going to say something that's not going to be politically correct, but I'm going to say it anyway. Anytime any of you guys out there are doubting yourself, just cut on the TV and look at the clowns that are lawyers and be like, you know what? They're lawyers. They're licensed. I'm not going to say any names, but you guys know they're all over the TV screen. And whenever you doubt yourself, realize one of the things, they don't doubt themselves. And they're in a particular place, in a position of influence and power. And there's nothing separating you from being able to do that as well. And I oftentimes think, a lot of times, I think kind of what you were saying is like, there's a lot of people out there who are lawyers who you're just as smart as and even smarter than. Am I right, Alexandria? Am I right? Am I right? Y'all know I'm right. But the thing about it is you being able to believe in yourself. And that's something that you can be able to do. Alexandria said we had the convo. You're right. And so one of the other things I want to ask you about, and you guys, y'all being too quiet over here. I want my chat box filled up with questions. So we want to make sure that we utilize this. I'm going to ask one question right here. Fresh Eyes, thanks for the question, fam. It said, what are your tips for improving in reading comp, right? Without compromising my comprehension. My problem is that I can read fast enough, but I don't want to sacrifice my comprehension for speed. You know about that, sis. The whole battle between speed and accuracy, trying to find that balance. So what do you say to that, sis?
I think reading comp is one of the sections where people talk about how it's more difficult to improve. And I think there's some truth to that, but there are obviously ways you can improve. I would say the most important thing that I feel like I learned is to not focus on the details of like what topic is being covered. If you could, I almost treat it like a longer LR stimulus. And what I mean by that is I know what I'm looking for, right? If you know what you're looking for, that saves you a lot of time on the LSAT that you don't have to waste, right? You don't have time to waste, so you have to know what you're looking for and be laser focused. And so with reading comp, I think I'll just share with you, this is, some of the things I would share with my students, but I'll just share with you some of the things that you want to focus on as you're reading in reading comp is you want to think about what the conclusion is. And usually the conclusion will be in multiple spots, right? In an LR question, it's short and small. And so there's one conclusion in one spot usually, almost always. But in reading comp, usually the conclusion is a combination of like one or two different sentences or ideas or thoughts or statements in the passage. So that's one thing. And one of the most important things is just thinking what is the main point or conclusion. Usually that will be one of the questions that will be asked, one of the first questions, but not always. But still, you want to think what is the main point. You want to think about what is the author's tone. Are they trying to persuade you of something, or are they trying to inform you? And that helps just shape how you think about the passage that you're reading. Also, I'm ignoring the questions because it'll distract me. But Anthony, feel free to ask me these questions as they come up later on too. But I'm just not reading them as they come up because.
Hey, listen, I promise you guys, whatever your questions are, we're going to get to. So please fill the chat box up.
Yeah, but I don't want people to feel like I'm ignoring them. I see there's questions. I just can't. It's too hard for me to think and read at the same time. I want to give my full attention to what I'm saying.
So go ahead, fresh eyes. You better be getting this information, fam. Go ahead.
Yeah, so, okay, so we talked about main conclusion. We talked about the author's tone, so thinking about persuasive versus informative. You want to think about anytime there's a comparison between things, right? So you want to not only notice that there's the comparison, but also does the author feel one way about one thing versus the other? Do they feel, for example, do they feel positive, neutral, or negative about the things that they're comparing, right? And they could feel differently about the two, they could feel the same about the two, but you want to notice these things. And I'm sharing all of these things, and what I want you to take away from what I'm sharing is that at the end of the day, what you're thinking about is not the like specific topic. They could be talking about laptops, they could be talking about lights. I'm just like looking at my room, right? They could be talking about a city. They could talk about anything. It doesn't matter. Are they trying to inform you of something, or are they trying to persuade you? Are they comparing things? What point are they trying to make? Um, Really, at the end of the day, every sentence that you read, you want to think about, why did they include this, right? You're not sitting there and writing it all out, but like, do you want to think about what's the purpose? And so there will also be like, support. So you want to notice anytime that there's support. It could be an example, it could be a study, it could just be something that's supporting the conclusion. I'm trying to think off the top of my head what else you want to be thinking about. Um, there could be things that are background information, but the other thing I was going to say is that as you're reading the passage, you really want to slow down. I know people are very worried about speed. When you're studying for the LSAT, I think it's actually important to slow down. You slow down in the beginning so you can get faster towards the end. And what I mean by that is, when you're studying, your goal is not to finish in the amount of time necessarily, right? Like eventually you want to get there, but especially if you're a few months out, not as you get closer to tests, but especially if you're a few months out, your goal is to really take the time to understand each question as much as you can. Because what happens is, if you want to learn the patterns of the test, you're only going to learn those patterns if you really take the time to read everything and understand it. So one thing you want to do when you're studying is, as you're reading passages, you want to review, like, what is this actually saying and what does it mean? So try to put it in your own words. And that doesn't mean like, you take a couple minutes to do that. It's just like, you don't want to not be actively engaged as you're reading. Okay, I don't want this to get too in the details, but if anyone has questions about that, I can add more to that. But the general idea is, don't just read the words on the page. Make sure you understand what you're reading and you think about it in your own words.
You got that, Fresh Eyes? Because I definitely learned some stuff that I did that maybe I could have been helpful to me back in those days. I definitely learned something. And so for you guys who just joined us, we have the pleasure of having Attorney Doreen with us. Follow her at Before You Take the LSAT. Sister's been helping people for 10 years kill the LSAT game. And I know you may say, well, I got to work, I got kids, I got family. Well, hey, it's still something that can be done. And she's been helping people do it for 10 years. And she's taken the time to be able to drop some gems. What's going on, April? You better ask a question, sis. And so let's go ahead and keep rolling here with some of the other questions. And for you guys, all of you guys, I want to see you guys win. I want you guys to utilize this as an opportunity. Realize I'm doing this from a position of love, not to call you out. No, he didn't call my name, because I just want to see you guys win, okay? It's all love over here. All right, so somebody asked a question about, how do you decrease your anxiety? And I thought one of the things that's kind of cool is you actually practicing the test in the coffee shop on purpose to deal with that anxiety. I never thought about that. Or doing extra section, so that way you're actually practicing on a longer exam. So mind blown. So what are some other things you want to, and thank you, Ari, for asking that question. What's some other things you want to tell them about that?
I could talk about anxiety. One thing I want to say really quick, though, to your point about people working, I just want to say, like, this test does take time to get better, but I've worked with people who, they told me themselves, right, that they only improved their score when we worked together, not before or after, and we did 3 sessions. And in 3 sessions, they improved their score enough to get a full scholarship to UPenn, so an Ivy League law school. So they're going to be an Ivy League lawyer after doing 3 sessions worth of studying for the LSAT, right? Obviously, they studied outside of those sessions, but I just want to share with you that, like, just put in the work. Don't worry about, like, oh my God, how long is this going to take me? When am I going to see improvements? But if you're studying and you're doing the right things, right? And I feel like I keep saying that, and we haven't talked so much about what that means. We've talked about some of those things, but I'll share more. But if you are studying and putting in the work, you can see improvement. And sometimes you don't need as much improvement as you think in order to get into the schools, and sometimes even get a full scholarship, right? So to answer the question about anxiety, that's a good question.
Yeah.
I, they're asking what my Instagram is. It's just before you take the LSAT. Before you take the LSAT. But anxiety. I think I honestly like I'm not the type of person that generally has a lot of anxiety. I just have a lot of faith. And for people who lean into religion or just generally are spiritual or have faith, that's something that I just generally believe things work out as they should. And so that might be helpful to some people and not as helpful to other people, especially if you're not religious or believe in faith or have a faith that you believe in. But outside of that, you could take the test again. And it's in the best interest of the school to just look at your highest score. You don't want to have like a downward trend. You don't want to take the test millions of times, right? And I took it 4 times, so like even that is okay. But the idea of like you do your best, you take the test. If you don't get the score that you want, you can retake it. It's not, there's no reason to add an extra layer of like stress and anxiety. Just if you are able, I know people have limitations. Some people have kids, some people are not going to be able to take off the time, whatever it is. But at the end of the day, there is the option, if you're able to take advantage of it, there is the option of retaking the test. So if you can do that, hopefully that helps decrease your anxiety. And know that from my experience, I've talked to a lot of people about their path to law school just because I'm in this industry, right? And I like to hear people's actual stories, not just what I hear online or like, generally how people think. So I want to hear real stories. And it's more likely that someone who went to top, from my experience, it's more likely that someone who went to a top law school took the test more times than someone who didn't go to a top law school. And what I'm trying to get at is these people just took it again. That's all it was. Like they just didn't give up and they took it again. And that's ultimately what allowed them to get into, like, most people are not just going to get the score that they want necessarily on their first try. You can hope for that, you can prepare for that, and it could be the reality for you that you're happy after your first try. But you shouldn't feel ashamed or give up or have anxiety about the fact or whatever that you didn't do as well as you wanted the first time. Like there are kids at Harvard, there are kids at Columbia, there are kids at all these top schools who had to take it multiple times and they didn't let themselves get in the way. All of these things about self-doubt and anxiety, it's you getting in your own way. And there's enough other things getting in your way that you shouldn't be the thing that's stopping you. And I feel like, I don't know, again, I don't know how helpful some of these things are to people, but for me, the self-talk, the way I talk to myself and the way I think about things and like the mental game is something I've actively worked on. And that's why when I recommend things like Can't Hurt Me, the book that I mentioned about David Goggins, he's overcome so much. Like I don't even want to get into it because his story is so insane. But if you want to work on your mental game and you have enough time between now and your LSAT, that's something that I think even for law school it'll help you. So the audiobook Can't Hurt Me is one thing that can help you with all of these issues, I think.
And one thing just to piggyback on, because I know you guys, I'm trying to be as transparent to you guys as possible. I definitely had huge issues with anxiety. And I know one of the things that I had to do is like one of the things that Doreen said, I had to accept, I can take it again. If it doesn't go well, I can take it again. But one of the other things that I had to do is it was about my preparation. And so some of the things I did a lot of practice exams in time conditions. And of course, I'm a bit extra if you guys don't know me yet on Becoming JD, but I do things a little bit more different than other people. So, Noreen, check this out. This may sound crazy, but this is what I did, right? So, when I was at Morehouse, I found out where I was going to be taking the LSAT. We were taking the LSAT at Emory. So, this may sound crazy to many, but I'm going to tell you anyway. So, what I did was I literally started practicing in the room where they were doing the LSATs at. Because for some reason that worked for me. That actually worked for me in law school. I don't know why, because I was literally able to look at the boards and I filled up with all this stuff about torts and criminal law. And during the exam, I saw everything. And so, but being in the room where the exam was happening or practicing the exam multiple times, and I think one of the things you guys should really check out as Genius is we oftentimes are looking for that perfect situation to study in. And when we get into those rooms to do the test and there's noise and there's people, because we're not used to that, it just causes even more anxiety. So I think the idea she said about literally taking a practice test in a coffee shop, take the headphones off, hear the noise, hear the people angry about their orders, and that may help you in practicing and getting focused. What's going on, Nancy? And so that's just an idea that worked for me. And, you know, I think that's something that it helped me, because the perfect situation I was always looking for. And that's where I was struggling, but it really helped my grade go up. So let's see here. We got some more.
Can I share some thoughts based on what you just said really quick?
Go ahead.
So one thing I want to say is, with the idea of taking the test in a coffee shop, I think I've worked with students who have done it and then they freak out because their score is not that high. And that's normal, right? Obviously, you're not going to have the same score in a coffee shop. So don't think that every single time you take the LSAT, it should be the same or higher. You're going to have dips, and that's okay. What you want is a general trend going up. Another point is that for me, I took it multiple times, and it happened more than once that right before I took the exam, like the week of the exam, I had a score that was much lower than how I was averaging. And I share that because that also happens to me or my students. And I also think that that's somewhat normal, right? You're more likely to be burnt out right before you take the test, right? Because you amp it up and you are starting to study more. So don't just I just feel like people, this test is so mental, and I'm so glad that we're talking about the psychological aspects of it, because if you let that get to you, right? If you let that get to you, it's just, you're getting in your own way. But it's normal to have these dips, and as long as you're generally going up, that's a good thing. You should be aiming to score at least 3 or 4 points higher than what you actually want to see on the day of the test to account for any mistakes or anything. And you should never include, these are just some tips that are coming to mind, but you should never include guess answers when you're practicing. So when you're doing a practice test, don't include guessed answers towards your score. On the day of the test, obviously, if you don't finish, you should guess answers because there's no points lost that way, but you don't want it to inflate your score when you're practicing. So that's another thing that I would share. I just wanted to share those things that came to mind.
And listen, man, one of the things that I tell people about this test, and I'm sure you can test, the LSAT is BS proof. We could BS our family. Yeah, man, I've been studying and grinding. And, I call it coffee shop studying, that comfortable studying that we do. We got the nice little drink and, it looks all nice and pretty and well manicured for Instagram. But when it comes to studying, man, it's ugly. It's uncomfortable. And it's also a process where you have to be honest with yourself. Because one of the things Doreen said, you have to, did I guess on that? No, did I guess on that? You can lie to yourself, but when you lie to yourself, it ends up hurting you in the end. Because I know sometimes we have to make sure that we know the process. And anytime that we skip it, the only thing that we're really skipping and hurting is ourselves. Am I right, Nori? Because I know I'm hard being honest. Dang, I guess on that.
Can I add to it? There's something else that came to mind also.
Absolutely.
A lot of people in this generation are spending a lot of time on social media, including me. I'm not going to say I'm not. I'm also there, right? I'm with all of you. It's very, very hard to focus. I think, it's very, very hard to just sit there for hours at a time and focus. If you can do that, you have an edge, but most people have to build up to that. So one thing I want to share on that note is, for those of you who don't know, I have a podcast. I interview current and former lawyers about their career path. And someone that I interview, his name is Morty, he goes by Morty for Prez Online, but he shared with me that when he was in law school, he was never a good student. He actually was waitlisted at every school he applied to, and that's another story. But when he was in law school, he had a lot of trouble focusing. He's a TikToker, And so what he did was he told himself, one, that he is always going to be the last one to leave the library. Two, he literally took his phone and put it in his locker and then went to his study desk. Three, he's super social, which I am too. If I sit in a coffee shop, it's hard for me not to talk to other people, but he found I think he described it like it was underneath the staircase, the desk that he used in the library. Like he would just go to that desk where no one could find him. And then another thing he told me is that when he would sit and study, let's say he was done studying, he promised himself he'd be the last one in the library, he would still sit there. So he was just getting his body and his mind used to the idea of, I'm going to be the last one here, even if that means like I'm done, but I'm still going to be here. I'm not leaving. And I share all of that because I think it takes a while to train your brain to get to the point where you could sit for hours on end and like really focus. It took time for me too. It wasn't like the first day I started studying, I could study for 10 hours, right? And you don't have to you don't even have to get to the point of studying for 10 hours, right? But you do want to at least get used to studying for 3 or 4 hours because the test is 3 hours. But yeah, I just want to share, look, if you're someone who spends a lot of time on social media, and even if you're not, a lot of us have trouble just sitting and staying focused for long periods of time. Don't ignore that that's something to work on, and don't feel discouraged if you have trouble sitting down and focusing. Like, part of studying is getting yourself into that, I don't know if mentality is the right word, but you want to get yourself in that air, like in that, you want to get yourself to be able to do that. And so eventually you'll get there, but don't give up. The hardest part is that beginning part of just like getting used to it.
Yeah. I mean, and the thing about it is just like you have to know yourself. Morty realized for me to be my best self, I have to do this.
Yeah.
And the other day, I tell people, I said, one of the things, not just about the LSAT, but also about law school, is the biggest thing that you learn is about yourself. You learn what you have to do to be successful. At the start of the interview, you mentioned, you had to find out what you need to do well. How do you need to study? And I know we want to go kind of bring back to that. How do I find out? Because I think sometimes that's one of the biggest challenges. How do I find out what works for me? Because unfortunately, for a lot of us, let's be honest, in college, we had a lot of bad study habits. We didn't know how to study. We didn't know how to do anything. And now we're trying to figure this LSAT out. And I think a lot of times people are struggling, really trying to figure out, what works for me. You figured it out. Your sisters was able to figure out. What advice do you have to people out there who are literally still kind of going blind? I mean, because you can't just open up a book. Unfortunately, it don't work like that.
In terms of figuring out what works for you, I would think back to some people might still be in college, but like think about what worked for you in college, in high school. Like we've all been in school, right? You can't get into law school without having been in school, right? So from all the time that you've been in school, even if you haven't always been like the best possible student, you can think back to the times that you did well and think about what worked for you. So everyone has a different method, right? And just generally, what kind of person, like, what's your personality like? Are you the type that wants to spend your entire day studying, or are you the type that knows, listen, if I do 3 or 4 hours, like I'm going to maximize my 3 or 4 hours and that's all I need and that's what I want to do. So I think it goes back to like thinking about what worked for you in college or high school, or if you're still in college, like what works for you now. But also, if you still don't know, you can just test things out. Try studying for shorter periods of time. Try studying for longer periods of time. Try different, environments. I mean, I like studying sometimes in coffee shops, but for some people that's completely distracting. I spent a lot of time studying. I said at the beginning of this that I am from LA. I liked studying at the West Hollywood Public Library. It was a beautiful view, and libraries are free, right? So I just go to the library, I sit there, and they had like a glass, their walls were all glass, so it didn't feel like I was in a like box. Yeah. And so for me, that was helpful. These little things and also another thing I did was, I treated myself, I don't want to say like a child, but almost like a kid, where I was like bribing myself. I told myself if I studied, that I would like treat myself with like a meal, because anyways I had to eat, right? And it would take time to go home, prepare the meal, whatever. And I usually like to make my meals at home, but when I was studying, I told myself like, okay, you can reward yourself with getting a meal or coffee or whatever it is, right? So that's just, or you can DoorDash, whatever it is. But if I put in the effort and put in the work, then I would reward myself. Also, having like accountability buddies to keep you accountable, having support, I think, is really important. But going back to the question of like figuring out what works for you, I would say experimenting. But more importantly, if you can think back to what's worked for you in the past, you've been a student in the past, even if you haven't felt like you maximized, what you could be able, you maximize your potential, you could still think of moments that you were scoring how you wanted or you were happy with how you were doing and think about what you did then. I think that's really important because you don't want to build from scratch if you don't have to.
Absolutely. Now, I mean, I hope you guys are catching these gems. All right, Mr. President 17 said, what are some of the tips for pulling inferences and deductions in LGs?
That's a good question. Okay, so when you're doing a logic game, I think one of the most common mistakes I see people make is that they rush into the questions. I think generally one of the biggest mistakes people make on the test is rushing. The more work you do up front, whether it's LR, reading the stimulus and fully understanding it, reading comp, reading the passage and fully understand, you don't have to memorize everything and know every last detail, but understanding the structure. And then in games, the mistake people make is that when you set up your game and you go through the rules and you write out a little diagram and you write all your pieces and you do all of those things, a lot of times people just go straight into the questions. But you're doing yourself a disservice when you do that. What you should do, instead of going straight into the questions, is pause for a second. I highly recommend rereading all the rules and making sure you didn't make any mistakes, because that will be deadly, right? I mean, I don't want to make people have anxiety, but like you should check. You should make sure that you wrote it all right, and not just make sure. The rereading is to make sure you got it all right, but also to really understand the rules. But during that time of like after you wrote the rules all out, what I recommend is just pausing and thinking, okay, what are some inferences I can make? And the way that you make the inferences is that you look through all of your rules and you see if there's any overlap between, like, is the same piece represented in two different rules, right? Is there two rules talking about the third spot so that if one of them goes there, then the other one can't go? Is there something like a piece that's super restricted, and by restricted I mean there's a lot of things that have to come before and after it, so that maybe it can only go in a few spots and you have to just take 1 second, not actually, you maybe take 10-15 seconds, right, to count how many things come before this piece, how many things come after this piece, and so that means that this can only go in spots 4 and 5, for example, right? That's an inference. It's a basic inference, but it's an inference, thinking about what can go in the last spot. Sometimes there's only one thing that can go in the last spot. And if you sit there and you ask yourself what can go in the last spot, you can figure that out. Because what you want is not to go into the questions and have to figure out everything from scratch. As much as possible, you want to make these inferences before you even get to the questions, to the point that you're almost predicting what they're asking or what they're going to ask you. And you can't predict everything they're going to ask you, but like a lot of times, if you really put in the effort when you're doing the questions, you can predict at least one or two of the questions before they ask it. And that's just figuring out like things like, what is the most restricted piece? What's the least restricted piece? What's, thinking about like what's a floater, right? Floater is a piece that doesn't have any rules attached to it, so it can go anywhere on the game board. So yeah, making inferences is something that you should do up front. You shouldn't wait until you get to questions to make an inference, because you're going to have to make the inference at the end of the day. It's better to do it up front and have it ready for all of the questions rather than having to, right? You want to be proactive about it. You don't want to be reactive to the questions.
Fantastic. You got that, Mr. President? Now, I want to ask some questions because I think this could help with the anxiety in regards to helping people set goals. DJ Sims, make sure you check this out, fam. Is time-wise, now maybe, of course, now in practicing it's not going to be there, but time-wise is, how much time should I be spending on each question after I'm prepared, where should my goal be? Should it be like a minute and a half per question? How much time should I put on the setup? What is the goal that people need to be having to be operating when they go into a question? When they open up? Yeah.
It's so hard to answer that question because the thing is, there's no one time that you need for each game, right? Because some games are easier than others, and you won't even know which game is harder or easier up front necessarily. I think on average, what is it? Like you have 8 minutes, I think. Like if you actually split it, you have like 8 minutes, I think, per game. Um, I I feel like, yeah, I don't want to give numbers and then people like stick to it, but I think what I would say is obviously, right, you want to average at eight, I think it's 8 or 8.5 minutes per, or actually it might be less. There's 4 games and you have, yeah, I think it's a little bit less. But what I would say is like, okay, on average, you want to be able to meet whatever it is, let's split like all the games by four and the time by four, and figure out what that is. But what I would say, what I can tell you like definitively is that there are some games that might take you 5 minutes, right? Whereas other games might take you 8 or 10. And so you just need to get to a place where your intuition about how long a game should take you is honed. Like you've done enough games where you're like, okay, I can tell that this might be an easier game. You won't know for sure, but you can kind of have a sense of like, this is a slightly easier game. Um, but usually I would say there are some games that should take you less time, and there are going to be some games that take you more time. They're not going to be even across the board. That's what I would say is don't expect excuse me one second. Don't expect that they're all going to be even. Expect it's much more likely that they're not going to be equal in terms of how much time you take. There usually are some games that are easier, and it's not necessarily going to be in the order of difficulty and things like that.
And I
It's a
wish
hard question.
all easy, but you're lucky if you get one of those sections where you can only spend 5 minutes on it. Just say thank God and make sure that you maximize all those points. But I see Madeline, she said, how many times full practice tests did you take before you retook the LSAT? And I think people are trying to figure out that balance too. How many practice tests do I take? And then how do I fit taking practice tests in with also studying?
Yeah, so when I talked about like the right way to study, the answer to this question is going to address that. What's the right way to study? One of the biggest and most important pieces of studying is the practice test. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
the practice test itself is not the most important thing. The review of the practice test is the most important piece of your studying. To answer your question, I'll start there. It's I personally believe that you should do at least I don't want to scare people. I think you should do at least 20 practice tests, right? And I don't think that's little, I don't think that's a lot personally. I think 20 is a good number where if you take 20 practice tests and you really review them, and by really review, I mean if you got a question wrong, you should know why the right answer is right and the wrong answers are wrong, and you should take your time with that. So it could take you hours to do something like that. But if you do that with 20 practice tests, I think you should be in a good spot. And those 20 tests should be on the more recent side. It shouldn't be like practice test 20, from 20 years ago. It should be more recent tests. So that's one thing I would say is to answer the question, I think 20 is a good number. There's no hard science on this. I don't know. There's no like exact number, but I have felt in my path and when I teach that 20 is like a good point to be at. I would say that when you're studying, you should be taking practice tests pretty regularly. And the practice test, it shouldn't be about like how am I scoring necessarily. It is nice to see if your score is improving, if what you're doing is improving your score. That is information that you can get, but it's a lot more about the mental stamina that we talked about. You want to know what you're working towards. So every time you take a test, you're getting a better sense also of like time management. How much time do I spend? The question about how much time you spend on games. You'll get an intuition. You'll get a feel for that as you're doing more and more logic game sections. So I would say like it depends how much time you have before the test, how long you've been studying, but roughly taking like a test per week is probably a good starting point when you're a little bit out from the test, like a couple months out from the test. When you get closer to the test, the closer you can get to taking multiple tests a week. That might be like 2 or 3 tests a week. And that's not doable for everyone, especially if you're working full time. It could be more difficult, but the closer you can get to taking 2 or 3 tests per week, I think that'll help you maximize your score. But yeah, the answer is 20. I think.
And just to piggyback on that, you guys, like literally everything she said, I did this, and like a lot of you guys out there, let's keep it a buck. We scared to take practice tests. Y'all scared because you begin to see, you rather study and be blind to see where you are. Because I ask people, say, how many practice tests you test? Well, have you taken tests on the time condition? No, I've just been studying. You guys, we really have to be. We're hiding from where, that's where the growth happens. Am I right, sis? That's where the growth happens. And like literally right now, I think if you DM me the word LSAT, you get free tests. And I remember just what I had to do because, let's say, at that time, I already took all the practice courses. I ain't had no money left, so all I had was practice tests. And so every week, kind of like what she talked about, I took a practice test. And what I would do, and literally what she just spoke of, and I want you guys to be able to understand, it's just like there's growth in your wrong answers. You want to get them wrong. The best thing can happen is you get them wrong and not guess them right and get them wrong on the test. And so I remember it's painful. I ain't gonna lie, man. You have so many the highs you get when you get back to back questions right. Oh, it's great. But then that low when you get two of them wrong back to back, and it feels like someone just ripped out your heart. But Nancy, I say this to you because I want you to win. I want all you guys to win. Is that you have to take those practice tests. Take them every week. And I know one of the things I did for me, I know you guys are techies out there, but for the bar, I did this also for law school, is literally, you're going to laugh at this, Doreen. I wrote out all my wrong answers, like all my explanations for the LSAT. I would write them all out. And then after that, I went and recorded them. And so when I went to go work out and went to go run, literally I was living, breathing, sleeping LSAT explanations for an entire week. And then you guys, I would take another test that next week and do the same thing and the same thing. And I was doing it every week. And I know you guys, it hurts, but man, that's a part of the process, man. And that's the only way we're going to get these scores up. We got to be able to see where we're weak at, because that's the only way growth is going to happen. You're not going to open your eyes. Noreen just open up her eyes and have a 174. Your answer is to get there, and it's okay. It's okay, Nancy. It's okay, Dancer. It's okay. It doesn't define who you are. It's just a stepping stone, because I'm sure Noreen could tell you all it's going to do is prepare you for, you thought the LSAT was bad. Wait till you go to law school. Wait till you take the MPRE. Wait till you take the bar exam. And so this is all about your brain starting that process of changing. And so let's see here. We got some more questions. You want to add anything to that?
Yeah, first of all, I want to say hi to my sister who just joined. She's been like a huge supporter. So thank you, Shannon, for joining and for being there in my journey. I hope everyone finds someone who can be there and support them. It doesn't have to be someone in your family, but having someone support you, it really, really, really helps. Like talking about the mental game, that is going to really help you. But also, Anthony, I want to say you said something that I always like to say. Wrong answers when you're studying are a blessing. Truly, and like people don't feel that way, and I almost feel like they hate, I mean, I don't know, but I feel like they would hate me for saying that. But like, if you don't get answers wrong when you're studying, what are you going to learn from? You want to just like, you're just going to get a 180 on your practice test and get a 180 on your test. I mean, that would be super nice, but usually doesn't work that way. The wrong answers are what you need to then get the right answer ultimately on the day of the test. So every time you get a question wrong when you're studying, every time you get a question wrong when you're studying, that is a clue on how you can improve and get better. That's an opportunity for you to sit down and say, okay, what went wrong, right? I can become a doctor before you become a lawyer, right? Sit down and diagnose the problem. What did I do wrong here? And you can have a tutor help you with these things, but honestly, as a tutor, I'm telling you, the more time you spend figuring out why you got that question wrong, and why the right answer is right and the wrong answers are wrong, to the point that you like sit down and write out the explanations, the better you're going to get at the test. There, in my opinion, there is almost nothing else that will help you improve your score as much as doing that, right? We talked about taking practice tests is one of the most important things. And then I said reviewing your practice test is even more important. What I mean by that is sitting down, and this is not fun, right? Dirty work. It's like sitting down and doing things you really really, really are not going to want to do, and your brain is going to hurt. And again, that's a good sign, right? Shannon knows I talk about that, and she missed it in the beginning, but that's something that she knows about and my students know about. It's going to hurt your brain most likely, and it did hurt mine too. But yeah, sitting down and writing out why the right answer is right, the wrong answers are wrong, and realizing that every time you get a question wrong, that is what you want when you're studying, because you don't want that when you're taking the test. And the only way to not have that happen when you're taking the test is to sit down and figure out why you're getting it wrong when you're studying. So it's a blessing. How else are you going to learn? You're not going to get all of them right, right? I don't know that many people who just get a 180 off the bat. So you're going to get them wrong. Expect that, but then also expect more of yourself where you're going to sit down and figure out why you got it wrong. And that way you can avoid getting it wrong on the day of the test. So,
And it's okay to get mad at yourself. And the thing about it is I want you guys to understand, listen, there are going to be times where you're going to get mad.
yeah.
There's going to be times where you cry. There's going to be times you throw books. Man, Doreen, I threw my book a whole lot of times. But you know what? The book's sitting there like, yeah, you're going to pick me back up.
Yeah.
You're going to pick me back up. And it's okay. It's going to be a process. And I know a lot of people out there, they're thinking, you know, maybe, and this is, I'm sure you hear this, maybe this is a sign that I shouldn't do it. No. A lot of people just like, you know, and I want to ask you this. I know we're going a little bit long, but a lot of people right now are making a decision right now. And I want to, because I'm sure you have a lot of clients that are being faced with the decision of saying, do I take it in January or February, or do I just wait again the next year? And I've told people, listen, man, we don't know what the next test is going to look like. We have some ideas, but we know this is the method right now. And this is the method, and it may make you feel uncomfortable, but boy, no logic games next time? I'm worried. So what have you been telling your clients?
So, I mean, I can even share with you what, you know, I've talked to my sister about this too, and my clients obviously, but I would tell you that, first of all, when the logic games are taken away, they're replacing it with LR. So it's actually not a huge concern in terms of like, there are pros and cons. One benefit is, the benefit of having logic games on your exam is that logic games are very learnable, especially in a shorter period of time, as opposed to LR and reading comp. Each of those, I feel like they get a little bit more difficult to master. So that's the pro of having the LR on your test. The con is, and there's obviously others, but I'm just sharing the high level ones. The con is you have to learn another section, right? So if you don't have games on your test, then you only have to focus on learning two sections. And that makes a huge difference when you could put all your energy on just learning those two sections. So those are the high level pros and cons. The other considerations are, one, how much time do you have to study, right? Because that can kind of, if you're not sure you can do as well as you'd like and put in the time and effort that you need between now and July to like really master it, and also have some cushion if you have to retake the test, because nobody plans to retake the test, or at least
No.
I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. It's not a bad thing, but like it's better to just plan to take it once. And I shared with you, I took it 4 times, and a lot, like, people do, it's fine, but you want to plan to do as well as you can on that first test. So yeah, you need to have some cushion room to retake if you need. So with all of that, like, do you have enough time between now and the last test this July to like really maximize your score? So does it make sense to study for this section? That's something that you have to decide for yourself. The other consideration is, when do you want to start law school, right? Some people have to take it January or February because that's, for a lot of schools, it's the last test you could take. There's some schools that take later, but for a lot of schools, that's the last test that you could take to get into law school to start next year, start in 2024. But if you have more time and you're okay starting 2025 or later, then maybe you're okay taking August or later. But all of this to say, I don't think there's necessarily a bad option. I mean that genuinely. I don't think you can go wrong. I think the only place you can potentially go wrong is that if you try to like study for LR and games and reading comp in 2 or 3 months, and like then you don't, and then you have to retake the test without games and you spent time on games that you could have spent on LR, it's not the end of the world, but ideally, right, you want to focus on the sections that will be on your test. And if the games won't be on your test ultimately, then, you know. So I don't think, I think the main pro of taking it with the games is that the games are learnable. But it is a whole other section that you're going to have to learn. You have to put in the effort. So there are factors to consider, and the main one is how much time you have between now and the exam.
And honestly, I hope one of the tones that you guys have been able to get, and again, thank you, Doreen, for joining us. You guys better follow her before you take the LSAT.
Thank you.
A lot of this work has to be in regards to you having to be honest with yourself.
Yeah.
Yourself. Do you have enough time? And this can't be, it can't be about ego, because I know, man, I honestly, immediately, I'm signing up to retake it after I didn't do well, but are you ready? Do you have enough time to be able to do well? Do you know what you need to do to be able to perform well? And so for people, sis, who, let's say they just got their LSAT scores back maybe a couple weeks ago, and they immediately signed up for the next test for January, how should they go? I mean, it's not a lot of time. Strategy-wise, if that's the route that they're going, what would you recommend for them to do? Because I have a lot of people, I'm looking at the time, I'm like, bro, you need about, but what strategy do you get, or what do you recommend for those people who've already made that decision?
To take the test in January, and like, what should they do in the limited time that they have left?
Yeah.
I think when you have limited time, you do want to focus on learning the strategies. That's always going to be important. But I think the most important test is to get the rep. The most important thing is to get the reps in. So taking tests. I think the most important thing is taking tests and like building your mental stamina for the exam, and like building your intuition and your time management and all of those things. So yeah, when you have like limited time, usually that's what I would recommend, is focusing on the tests more than anything. It's just like, that's the thing that's going to help you improve your score the most, is continuing to take them, and also maybe adding the extra sections or taking it in the coffee shop without letting the score, potentially a score drop affect your mindset. But yeah, I think the most important thing is to take as many tests without burning out.
Well, and one of the things as we close, one of the things I want to encourage you guys is realizing that your LSAT score does not determine your value or your worth. You do. This is just a stepping stone. This is just one tool that law schools use to be able to evaluate you. But it also is a tool that you are able to also help change the trajectory and change the amount of money that schools may offer you, or even be able to secure acceptances. But it is not the tool. Don't think that, oh my God, my LSAT's this, I'll never go to law school. But you do want to be able to do your best. And understand that, at the end of the day, it's going to sound silly to say it, but if you're studying your best. If you're preparing. And that's one of the things the LSAT always going to let you know, if you are doing your best. And I want to give you the last word. What word of encouragement you have for somebody out there who's studying, grinding, dealing with self-doubt? What would be your words of encouragement to them as we close?
I think so. What I would recommend in terms of words of encouragement is realizing that you're not just studying for yourself, and you're not just getting the score or going to law school for yourself. There are a lot of people, whether you know it or not, who can be inspired by whatever it is that you accomplish. So if you can realize that the purpose is not just for you, especially if there's something unique about your background, right? If you, like for me, I'm first generation. My mom didn't even know what Columbia was. No joke. Like, I went to her and told her I got into Columbia, and she's like, yeah. So when you realize that it's not just about you, like when people see that you accomplish something, it gives them hope that they can also, a lot of times it'll give them, especially someone who has a similar background to you, whether if it's they're also first gen, or they're also Middle Eastern, or if they're, whatever it is that you have in common, like when you see someone who's like you, similar to you, accomplish something, it gives them hope, just the same way that you look at someone else and you see that they've done it, and you're like, okay, if that person can do it, I feel like I can do it. And so not only do I recommend taking the inspiration of seeing someone else who's done it? And you're like, okay, if they can do it, that gives me hope that I can do it. Whether it's because you look up to them or you think that you're smarter than them, either way, right? It's fine. Just take the motivation where you can. But that's one thing. But then also realize like other people are paying attention to you. And the more that you accomplish, the more you can inspire the next generation, whether that's your peers, your friend group, or your own kids, right? If you plan to have kids or if you plan to have a family, like you are not doing this just for you. There's another generation that comes after you. And when you do well, you can pass on what you've learned. Um, you can pass on what you've learned to other people. And I really feel like I just feel like that's like the most powerful, one of the most powerful things,
And,
right?
and I hope that you guys, by hearing Doreen's story, listen, you see somebody who had a 174, but she didn't start there. She retook the LSAT. She went to Ivy League Law School. She is doing things to help other people be able to manifest their lawyer dreams, just like you. So again, thank you so much for joining us, sis. You guys, thank you so much for joining us for the show. Make sure you follow her before you take the LSAT. She has been wonderful in regards to helping
Thank you.
the tribe. Doreen, you know, you're part of the tribe now. So thank you so much for joining.
Thank you so much for having me.
And we'll, of course, continue to advocate and fight. And make sure you guys, if you have questions, go ahead and reach out to her. You guys,
Yeah.
we're all, you guys, when
Yeah.
she 10 years, and we're all here. You're not alone in this journey, you guys. You are not alone. And so,
Yeah.
go ahead, go.
Sorry, Anthony, if anybody else, if I missed people, I know there were a lot of questions that I think I missed. If people have questions, you can DM me, you can write to me. And this is not the first time Anthony and I have done something together. I'm sure there will be hopefully other opportunities too as well. But I hope that there were some takeaways that you felt like you got from today. And I think the most important thing is just there are a million things that can get in your way. Don't let it be you that's holding you back, right? There might be haters, there might be this, that, whatever it is, but like you should not be the one getting in your way.
Ooh, that's bars right there. She's dropping bars. And so, and so you guys make sure and reach out. Don't be a stranger. You're not on this journey alone. And you guys continue to fight for your lawyer dreams. Again, thank you, Doreen, and peace and blessings. See you again next Wednesday. Peace and blessings.